The sun had just begun to dip behind the distant hills, painting the sky with shades of gold and orange. In a small town far from the noise of big cities, a human named Armand was finishing his daily work. He lived a quiet life, simple and ordinary, and most days passed without excitement. Armand was known in his neighborhood as a kind-hearted person. He helped people whenever they needed a hand, and he had a soft spot for anything fragile or in need of care. But nothing in his life had prepared him for what was about to happen. That evening, the air carried an unusual stillness. Birds had stopped singing, and even the wind seemed to pause for a moment. Armand was walking back from the market with a small basket of vegetables when suddenly a strange light appeared in the sky. It was not like the usual stars or airplanes. This light was bright, almost blinding, moving faster than anything Armand had ever seen. At first, he thought it might be a meteor or some kind of storm, but something in his heart told him this was different. Within moments, the light grew larger and seemed to fall toward a nearby forest. Armand felt a mix of fear and curiosity. Most people would have stayed away, thinking it too dangerous, but Armand could not ignore it. He had always felt that life was about stepping forward, even when things were uncertain. Without a second thought, he started running toward the forest. His heart pounding in his chest, as he reached the edge of the trees, he saw the impossible. A small object had crashed into a clearing. Smoke rose from the ground, and the smell of burning metal mixed with something unfamiliar, something almost alive. Then he saw it, a small figure lying in the dirt. It was tiny, maybe the size of a human child, but unlike any child Armand had ever seen. Its skin had a faint glow, and its eyes were wide with fear. The being tried to move but could not stand. Armand's first instinct was to check if it was alive. He carefully approached and gently touched its shoulder. The alien child flinched but did not pull away. Its eyes were large, filled with both confusion and sadness, as if it had been through something terrible. Armand realized immediately that this little being was in pain and needed help. He knew that calling for help would be useless. No one in the town would believe him. How could he explain that he had found an alien child? But Armand didn't hesitate. Fear did not stop him from doing what was right. He picked the child up in his arms. The child was surprisingly light and fragile, trembling slightly as Armand held it close. Its small hands clung to him, and though it could not speak, Armand felt a connection he could not explain. It was as if the child knew he would protect it. He looked around, making sure no one was watching. For the first time, he felt the weight of responsibility. He was not just carrying a small being. He was carrying a life that depended entirely on him. Armand decided to take the child to his home, a modest little house at the edge of town. He moved quickly but carefully, knowing that any mistake could harm the child further. As they walked, the child's large, curious eyes kept scanning the surroundings. It seemed to understand that the world outside the forest was strange and unfamiliar. Armand spoke softly, though he knew the child might not understand his language. He said comforting words, telling the child that it was safe now, that he would not let anything hurt it. The child slowly relaxed a little, leaning against his chest, as if it had finally found a place of safety. When they reached the house, Armand laid the child on a bed, using soft blankets to make it comfortable. He studied the child carefully. Its skin had a soft, almost shimmering quality, and its features were delicate, yet unlike anything human. He noticed tiny markings on its arms and neck, symbols that seemed to glow faintly. Armand had no idea what they meant, but he understood that this child came from far away, from a place beyond Earth. Despite its alien appearance, Armand felt a strong bond. He could sense that the child trusted him. Even though they had never met before, as night fell, Armand sat beside the child, unsure what to do next. He thought about calling someone for help, but fear crept in again. What if the wrong people found the child? What if they wanted to harm it? His mind raced, and he realized that he might be the only one who could protect it. For the first time in his life, Armand understood what courage truly meant. It was not just facing danger, it was facing danger for someone else. For someone who could not defend themselves, the child made small, soft noises in its sleep. Armand watched over it, feeling a strange sense of wonder and awe. How had this being traveled so far? Why had it landed here, in this quiet town? Questions swirled in his mind, but he knew that answers could wait. Right now, the child's life was more important than anything else. He resolved that he would do whatever it took to keep it safe. Hours passed, and the night grew deeper. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, and the stars shone like distant fires in the sky. Armin felt a strange connection to the universe in that moment. He realized that the child was not just an alien, it was a reminder that life was bigger than the world he knew, that the universe held mysteries beyond imagination. He thought about how small and ordinary his life had seemed before, how this moment had changed everything. Suddenly he heard a faint sound outside, like a rustling in the bushes. His heart skipped a beat. He quickly checked the surroundings, making sure no one had followed him. The forest was dark and quiet again, but the sound had reminded him that danger could come at any time. He tightened his grip on the blankets around the child and whispered promises of protection. He did not know who or what was searching for the child, but he felt certain that others were looking. Some beings would not care about kindness or life. They would only see the child as a target. The night passed slowly, with Armin staying awake much longer than usual. He kept watch over the child, making sure it was breathing, making sure it felt safe. Each time the child stirred, he soothed it with soft words and gentle touches. By dawn, a bond had formed, a silent, unspoken connection. The child looked at Armin with trust, and he felt an unshakable responsibility. He knew that protecting this child would not be easy, but he also knew he could not turn away. The life in his arms was precious, fragile, and extraordinary. As the first rays of sunlight broke through the window, Armin made a quiet vow. He would not let anything harm this child. No matter the cost, no matter the challenges ahead, he would stand between the child and danger. In that moment, he did not yet know the full story, the enemies who might come, or the incredible journey that awaited them. But he did know one thing clearly: courage begins with a single choice, and he had chosen to protect life, even life that was not his own. That morning, the world seemed both familiar and new. The quiet town continued its routine, unaware that an extraordinary being now slept safely in a human home. And as Armin watched the child, he felt the first spark of a story that would change his life and perhaps even the galaxy forever. Armin could still feel the warmth of the morning sun on his face as he watched the small alien child sleeping peacefully. Its tiny chest rose and fell with each slow breath, and its delicate hands curled softly around the edge of the blanket. For a moment, Armin allowed himself to breathe and feel relief. The child was safe, at least for now. But deep inside, he knew the danger was far from over. Something told him that this little being had enemies, beings who would stop at nothing to find it. The thought made his stomach twist, but it also steeled his determination. After breakfast, Armin gently lifted the child and placed it on a soft chair near the window where the sunlight could warm it. He studied the child carefully. Its skin shimmered faintly, as if the light itself responded to its presence. Its eyes were large, round, and full of curiosity, though still tinged with fear. Armin realized that while the child had survived the crash, it had been through something terrifying. The way it looked at the world, hesitant, wary, and unsure, showed that it needed trust, patience, and protection. Armin promised himself he would give all of that. As he tried to think about the next steps, he noticed something unusual. The child's small fingers traced patterns in the air, and faint sparks of light followed its movements. They were not dangerous, but they were extraordinary, something Armin had never seen before. His heart raced with wonder and concern. Clearly, the child was special, and he realized that anyone who knew about these abilities would likely want to capture it. Armin felt a shiver run down his spine. He knew he had to act carefully and wisely if he wanted to keep the child safe. Armin decided to leave his home temporarily to gather supplies. He needed food, blankets, and other essentials that would help the child heal and feel comfortable. Before stepping out, he whispered softly to the child, "I'll be back soon. Don't be afraid. I'm here for you." The child's eyes followed him, watching every movement, and for the first time, Armin felt a deep connection. Though they could not speak the same language, their bond was growing stronger with every shared moment. As he walked through the town, Armand noticed something strange. A few people seemed to glance at him with curiosity, their expressions quickly turning to concern or confusion. He wondered if they had noticed something unusual about him carrying the child. He quickly realized that he had to be careful. Too many questions could draw attention. Armand had always been cautious in life, but now he needed to be smart and strategic. Every choice mattered, not just for him, but for the child in his care. Returning home, he carefully prepared a small area for the child, making it comfortable with soft blankets and pillows. He even set up a few small items that might bring comfort, things he thought a child might like. Even if this child was unlike any human child, the alien looked at the new surroundings with curiosity, reaching out to touch the soft textures. Armand smiled softly. Every small gesture of trust from the child felt like a victory. Days passed, and Armand began to notice changes in the child. It moved more freely, exploring its little space, and occasionally making soft, musical sounds. Armand tried to mimic the sounds, hoping to communicate in some way. Sometimes, it seemed to understand, and its eyes would light up with recognition. These moments were small, but they filled Armand with hope. He knew that despite the fear and danger surrounding them, a connection was forming, a connection that could be their greatest strength. But even as life settled into a cautious rhythm, Armand could feel the threat growing. Strange occurrences began to happen. He would hear distant noises outside his home at night, lights flickering in unusual ways, and shadows moving where they shouldn't be. One evening, he found tiny marks near his door, marks that were not human-made. His heart pounded. Whoever or whatever was looking for the child was getting closer. Armand realized that protecting the child would require more than careful steps. It would require courage, planning, and sometimes quick thinking. One afternoon, while the child rested, Armand tried to understand more about it. He noticed the faint markings on its arms, glowing softly in different colors. He had no idea what they meant, but they seemed to respond to the child's emotions. When the child was calm, the markings glowed gently. When it felt fear or anxiety, the lights flickered rapidly. Armand began to realize that these were not just decorative markings. They were connected to the child's life, perhaps even its powers. Understanding this became his priority. The next day, a small incident confirmed his fears. While the child was exploring a corner of the room, it accidentally touched an object that caused a small burst of energy. Papers flew, and a faint hum filled the room. Armand acted quickly, covering the child with a blanket and speaking in a calm voice to soothe it. The child's eyes met his, wide and scared. Armand's heart ached. He realized that the child's abilities, while beautiful and extraordinary, could also attract danger if they were noticed. Protecting it meant understanding these powers and keeping them hidden from the world. As the days went on, Armand began to teach the child small lessons about trust and safety. He showed it how to stay hidden, how to be careful when moving around, and how to feel calm even when danger was near. Though the child could not speak, it learned quickly, responding to gestures, expressions, and tone of voice. Armand marveled at its intelligence and resilience. Despite being far from home, hurt and scared, the child began to trust him completely. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing moment. However, Armand could not ignore a growing sense of urgency. He knew that the beings hunting the child would not give up easily. They were powerful, and they had resources beyond anything he could imagine. One evening, while he was keeping watch, he noticed a faint shimmer in the distance, like the air itself was bending. He felt a chill run down his spine. Something was approaching. He hurried back to the child and gently pulled it close, whispering words of reassurance. "I won't let anyone hurt you. I promise." The child clung to him, and in that moment, Armand felt a resolve deeper than anything he had ever felt in his life. Armand realized that protecting the child would not be a short-term task. It would require constant vigilance, careful planning, and sacrifices he had never imagined. He began to think about possible strategies, ways to keep the child hidden, ways to stay ahead of any pursuers, and ways to prepare for dangers that might come at any moment. He understood that this was more than just saving a life. It was about standing up for something larger than himself, something that mattered across the stars, The days turned into weeks. Armin's life, once simple and predictable, was now filled with purpose and urgency. Each morning, he woke up beside the child, feeling a deep sense of responsibility. He knew that the child's survival depended entirely on him, and he embraced this responsibility with courage. At night, he would look at the stars and wonder where the child had come from, imagining the distant worlds it had seen and the challenges it had faced. He also knew that the child's journey was far from over. Both of them were stepping into a world of dangers and wonders, beyond imagination. Through it all, one thing became clear to Armin: the child was not just an alien being. It was a symbol of hope, of trust, and of courage. Protecting it was no longer a choice. It was a calling. And though he did not yet know the full story, he understood that his life and the life of this extraordinary child was about to change forever. Every small smile, every sign of trust from the child, filled Armin with determination. He knew that danger was real, and that enemies were out there watching, waiting. But he also knew that he had something more powerful than fear: his courage, his kindness, and the bond he shared with the child. No matter what challenges lay ahead, he would stand firm. For the first time in his life, Armin understood the true meaning of bravery. It was not about fighting alone. It was about protecting someone who could not protect themselves. And so, with the child safely beside him, Armin prepared for whatever would come next. Little did he know, the challenges ahead would test his courage like never before, and the choices he made now would echo far beyond his small town, across the galaxy itself. Armin had always thought of himself as an ordinary human. But now, standing in the dim light of his small home, he realized that ordinary people could face extraordinary challenges. The air outside was quiet, but inside his mind was filled with tension. The child, the alien being he had promised to protect, was asleep on a small bed he had carefully prepared. Its breathing was calm and steady, but Armin knew this peace could not last. Danger was coming. He could feel it in the air, in the small shivers that ran down his spine whenever he looked out the window. Earlier that day, while the child was exploring a corner of the room, Armin had seen a small flicker in the distance, shimmer in the forest beyond his home. At first, he thought it might be a trick of the sunlight, but something in his gut told him otherwise. He had learned to trust this feeling. It was a warning. The beings searching for the child were closer than ever, and they would not stop until they had found it. Armin's heart pounded as he realized that he might be facing enemies far stronger than himself. Enemies who would not hesitate to harm the child to achieve their goals. He walked quietly to the window and peered outside. The forest beyond his home looked peaceful, but the shadows were deeper than usual. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the distant cry of a bird, even the soft whisper of the wind, made him tense. He felt a sense of urgency unlike anything he had ever experienced. Protecting the child was no longer just about keeping it safe from small threats or curiosity. This was life and death. He had to be ready to act. To stand between the child and the danger that lurked beyond the trees, Armin's thoughts turned to the child. Its trust in him was complete, and he could feel the weight of that trust pressing on him. The child depended entirely on him, and he could not fail. He quietly checked the blankets, made sure the doors were secure, even moved some furniture to create a barrier, just in case. Every small precaution felt necessary. Every moment of preparation felt like a shield against the unknown. He whispered softly to the child, "I'm right here. Nothing will happen to you." The child stirred slightly, but did not wake, as if understanding the words even without language. Night fell, and the darkness made everything feel more dangerous. Armin sat beside the child, holding a small lantern for light. Shadows danced on the walls, and every creak of the floor made him tense. He kept thinking about what might happen if the hunters arrived. He did not know who they were or what they wanted, but he knew their intentions were not good. The child's powers, though small, could attract unwanted attention, and Armin had to make sure no one discovered it before he was ready. Hours passed, and then it happened. A strange noise outside made him freeze. It was a low hum, unlike anything natural, a vibration in the air that made his skin tingle. He held his breath and listened. The hum grew louder, moving closer. Armand's heart raced, but he forced himself to stay calm. Panic would do no good. Slowly, carefully, he moved to the window to see what was coming. Through the shadows, he saw figures moving tall, dark and unrecognizable. They were not human. Their shapes shifted as they moved, almost blending with the night, but their intent was clear. They were searching, hunting, and nothing would stop them until they found the child. Armand's mind worked quickly. He could not let these beings enter his home. He had to protect the child at all costs. He glanced down at the sleeping alien, feeling a surge of determination. Armand grabbed a few objects from around the house, simple tools, things that could serve as barriers or distractions. He knew he could not fight them directly. They were too powerful. Instead, he would use his wits, his courage, and his understanding of the terrain to protect the child. He set up small traps and obstacles near the doors, things that would slow the intruders and give him precious time. He whispered softly, "Stay calm. Trust me. I won't let them take you." The child's eyes fluttered open slightly as if sensing the danger, and Armand felt the weight of his responsibility more than ever. Minutes felt like hours as the intruders approached. Their presence was almost suffocating, a reminder of how small and fragile a human life could be in the face of such power. Armand could hear their movements outside, the soft, calculated steps, the low hums, the whispers of a language he could not understand. He stayed hidden, keeping the child close, praying that his precautions would work. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to act, to fight, to protect. He was ready. Then the intruders tried the doors. Armand could hear the handles turning, the faint clicks of locks being tested. He held his breath and quietly moved to a small side door, ready to lead the child to a safer place if needed. His heart pounded in his chest, but he did not let fear control him. Fear was natural, but courage, he realized, was the choice to act despite fear. And he had chosen courage. As the intruders entered the house, they moved with precision, their senses sharp. Armand quickly pulled the child into a small closet he had prepared earlier. The child's small body pressed against him, trembling slightly, and Armand whispered soothing words. He could feel its heartbeat, small and fast, and he focused on keeping them both calm. The intruders searched the room, their presence heavy and dangerous, but Armand's preparations slowed them down. Every obstacle, every small trap bought them precious time. The intruders were relentless, moving from room to room, checking every corner. Armand stayed perfectly still, even as his heart raced. He knew that one wrong move could put the child in danger. He whispered softly, "Stay quiet. Trust me. We will be okay." The child's large eyes met his for a brief moment, and he saw something remarkable. Trust. Complete, unshakable trust. That trust gave him strength beyond anything he had known before. Suddenly, one of the intruders noticed the faint glow from the child's markings. A sharp hiss filled the room, and the intruders froze. Armand felt a surge of fear. This was the moment they could discover the child's secret. But he did not panic. With careful movements, he adjusted the blanket, dimmed the light, and kept the child close. Slowly, the intruders moved on, seemingly deciding to search elsewhere. Armand exhaled quietly, relief washing over him. But he knew this was only temporary. After what felt like an eternity, the intruders finally left the house. Silence returned, but it was not peaceful. Armand checked the child carefully, making sure it was unharmed. Its small hands clung to his arm, and its eyes, though wide and scared, reflected a growing trust and understanding. Armand realized something profound. Bravery was not about strength or weapons. It was about standing between danger and someone who could not defend themselves. And he had done exactly that. As dawn approached, Armand stayed awake, watching over the child. He thought about the events of the night, the danger, the fear, the close calls. He realized that their journey was far from over. The intruders would return, stronger and more determined. But he also realized something else. He and the child had formed a bond that could not be broken. Together, they had faced the first real test. They had survived. Armand knew that the next steps would be even more difficult. He had to find a way to protect the child from beings far more powerful than himself. He had to teach the child to trust, to hide, and perhaps even to use its abilities wisely. Every choice now mattered. Every action could determine whether they survived or fell into the hands of those who wanted to harm the child. But in that quiet moment, Armand allowed himself a small sense of pride. He had stood between life and death, not for glory or recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. The child was safe, and for now, that was enough. He whispered once more, "We are together. Nothing will break us." The child looked up at him. Its eyes filled with understanding, and for the first time, Armand felt that their journey, though dangerous, was also filled with hope. And so, as the sun rose over the quiet town, Armand stayed vigilant. He knew that the future held great challenges, but he also knew that courage, trust, and love could face any obstacle. He would continue to stand between the child and danger, no matter the cost. Because now he understood a truth greater than anything he had known before. Sometimes, being human meant being brave enough to face the impossible for someone who could not face it alone. Armand had learned many lessons over the past days. He had learned that courage was not measured by strength alone, but by the willingness to protect someone who could not protect themselves. He had learned that fear was not the enemy, but a guided signal that danger was near. And he had learned that trust, once given and earned, was a bond stronger than anything in the universe. Yet nothing had prepared him for what would happen next. It was late at night when Armand sensed the danger approaching again. The air felt heavier than usual, and the wind carried a faint hum. The same sound he had heard before when the intruders had searched for the child. This time, the sound was closer, sharper, more determined. Armand's heart pounded, but he moved carefully, preparing the small house as best as he could. Every blanket, every piece of furniture, every small object could become a barrier. He whispered to the child, "Stay close to me. Everything will be okay. I promise." The child clung to him, its small hands pressing against his chest, trusting him completely. Then, without warning, the intruders arrived. They moved with precision, their presence almost unnatural, filling the room with tension. Armand felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He was alone, facing beings far more powerful than he could imagine, and the life of the child depended entirely on his choices. Yet, despite the fear, he felt no hesitation. Courage, he realized, was not the absence of fear, was the decision to act despite fear. The intruders began to search the house, their movements calculated and relentless. Armand stayed close to the child, using every bit of his cunning to mislead them. He shifted shadows, blocked doorways with furniture, and created small distractions. Each moment he delayed the intruders was a moment of safety for the child. Yet he knew these measures would only last so long. The beings were intelligent. They would not be fooled for long. One of the intruders paused near the child's resting place. Armand held his breath, his hand tightly gripping the child to shield it. He whispered softly, "Stay still. Trust me." The intruder's gaze lingered for a moment, almost sensing something extraordinary in the child. Armand felt a surge of fear and adrenaline. He knew that if the child's abilities were discovered now, there would be no hope. But he also knew that the child trusted him, and that trust was a shield stronger than any barrier. Suddenly, one of the intruders moved toward the child with a speed that startled him. Without thinking, Armand stepped forward, placing his own body between the child and danger. The intruder paused as if surprised by the human's courage, and Armand felt a strange strength fill him. He realized that courage could transform ordinary people into extraordinary protectors. "I won't let you harm it," he said firmly, even though the beings could not understand his words. It was a promise, and it was real. The intruders attacked, and Armand had to act quickly. Using every ounce of his strength and every bit of strategy he had, he created obstacles and distractions, slowing them down. He dodged their movements, moved the child to safety, and held his ground, even as the danger grew closer. The child watched, eyes wide, as Armand risked everything. Despite the fear in both their hearts, there was a silent understanding. They were together. And together they could face anything. Time seemed to stretch as Armand continued to block the intruders. Every second was critical. He could see the determination in their movements. They were not here to negotiate, only to take the child. Yet, he refused to back down. With each passing moment, he learned to anticipate their moves, to act faster than fear, to protect the child at all costs. The bond between them became a shield, invisible but powerful. Giving him strength beyond his own limits, the intruders realized that the human was more clever than they had expected. Frustrated, they intensified their efforts, striking harder, moving faster. Armand felt the pain of exhaustion, his body aching from the constant strain, but he did not falter. He whispered softly to the child, "We can do this. You are safe with me." The child's eyes reflected trust, hope, and something else, understanding. It realized that Armand was willing to sacrifice everything for its life, and that realization filled it with a quiet strength as the confrontation reached its peak. Armand realized that the only way to save the child was to make a final stand. He positioned himself strategically, using his body to block the intruder's path. He knew that he might not emerge unscathed, but the child's life was worth any cost. The intruders moved with precision, but Armand was prepared. He dodged, blocked, and redirected their attacks. Each movement calculated to protect the child while keeping himself just out of harm's way. In the midst of the chaos, the child's powers began to manifest subtly. Faint glows and tiny sparks of energy appeared around it, almost instinctively, as if the child itself wanted to help. Armand realized that its abilities, though not fully understood, were linked to its emotions and trust. The more it trusted him, the more it could control the faint energy around it. This realization strengthened Armand's resolve. He continued to shield the child, knowing that together they could withstand the danger. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Armand's body was bruised and tired, but he did not waver. Each time the intruders struck, he used every ounce of his intelligence and courage to protect the child. He realized that his strength did not come from physical power alone, it came from love, trust, and the unwavering determination to protect life. In that moment, he became more than human. He became a symbol of courage, of sacrifice, of hope. Finally, the intruders paused, assessing the situation. Armand could see the surprise in their movements they had underestimated. The human's courage and the bond between him and the child. He knew that he could not defeat them through force alone, but he could hold them long enough for the child to survive. He whispered one last promise. "No matter what happens, you will live. I swear it." The child's eyes met his, filled with understanding and gratitude, and for the first time, Armand felt that his efforts were making a difference. In the climactic moments of the confrontation, Armand made a choice. He positioned himself directly between the child and the intruders, taking the brunt of their attack. Pain surged through his body, but he stood firm. The intruders, seeing his determination, hesitated for a moment. That hesitation was all the child needed. With a small gesture, the child's energy flared briefly, creating a barrier that forced the intruders back. It was not enough to defeat them, but it was enough to protect the child. As the intruders retreated temporarily, Armand collapsed to the ground, exhausted and injured. The child ran to his side, its small hands resting on him, trying to comfort him in the only way it could. Armand smiled weakly, feeling the warmth of trust and love. He realized that bravery was not about winning battles or defeating enemies. It was about standing firm when everything else seemed impossible, and protecting those who could not protect themselves. When the immediate danger passed, Armand helped the child to a safe corner of the house. He tended to its needs gently, making sure it was unharmed. Then, for the first time, he allowed himself to rest, even if only briefly. His body ached, his muscles were sore, and his mind was exhausted, but he had fulfilled his promise. The child was safe, alive, and still trusting him completely. That trust was more powerful than any weapon. It's more important than any strategy. As the night slowly gave way to dawn, Armand reflected on what had happened. He realized that the sacrifice he had made putting himself in harm's way was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a new chapter. The child's survival had changed everything. The galaxy, even if he did not yet understand it fully, would remember courage, trust, and the power of standing between life and death. And he knew, deep in his heart, that the bond he had formed with the child was unbreakable. Through all the pain, fear, and uncertainty, Armin understood a profound truth. One act of courage could change the course of lives, even the fate of worlds. He had stood between the child and death, and in doing so, he had become a protector, a guardian, and a hero. Not for fame, not for glory, but because it was right. And in that choice, he had set in motion a story that the galaxy would never forget. Days turned into weeks after that night, and the world outside Armin's small home seemed unchanged. Yet inside, everything had transformed. The bond between him and the child had grown stronger, deeper, and more meaningful. The child, once fragile and terrified, now moved with a quiet confidence, though it still depended on Armin's guidance. Armin, in turn, had discovered strengths within himself that he had never known existed: courage, patience, and a selfless determination to protect life at all costs. The child had begun to recover fully. Its injuries healed, and its trust in Armin complete. Slowly, it started to explore more of the world around it, though always under his watchful eye. Its abilities, though still delicate, had begun to develop in small, controlled ways. Faint glows of light followed its hands as it touched objects, and tiny sparks of energy sometimes danced across the floor. Armin understood that these abilities were part of what made the child extraordinary, and he realized that they could also attract danger. Protecting the child now required more than physical shielding. It required guidance, teaching, and careful strategy. As they spent time together, Armin began to teach the child about the world in simple ways. He showed it the sun, the trees, and the stars, explaining things in gestures, sounds, and gentle words. The child learned quickly, absorbing knowledge like a sponge. But more importantly, it learned about trust, compassion, and courage, the qualities that Armin had shown it through his actions. Every moment together strengthened the connection between them, a silent understanding that transcended language, species, and even worlds. However, the threat they had faced was not gone. Armin could sense that the beings searching for the child were still out there, watching, waiting, and plotting. He knew that one day they might return, stronger and more determined. But instead of fear, Armin felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had faced death to protect the child once, and he was ready to do it again if necessary. Courage, he realized, was not a one-time act. It was a choice made every day. In every decision, no matter how small or large. Over time, Armin began to notice something remarkable. The child's abilities, once raw and uncontrolled, had become more refined. Faint lights and sparks now responded to its thoughts and emotions. When it felt calm, the room seemed to brighten softly. When it felt fear or sadness, the lights flickered, but never dangerously. Armin watched in awe, realizing that the child's powers were linked to its heart, its trust, and its sense of safety. And he knew that by keeping it safe and showing love, he was helping it grow stronger in ways that could one day change the galaxy. Word of Armin's courage, though unknown on Earth, began to spread quietly among the stars. The child, sensing the human's bravery, often reflected on the night when he had stood between it and certain death. In those moments of reflection, it understood that one being, no matter how ordinary, could make an extraordinary difference. This lesson was more valuable than any power or technology. It was a lesson of love, sacrifice, and the strength of trust. As the seasons changed, Armin and the child began to prepare for a journey beyond their small town. Though the child's powers were growing, the universe was vast, and there were dangers still unknown. Armin taught the child to move carefully, to hide when necessary, and to listen to the instincts that had guided them through their first trials. They practiced quietly in hidden corners of the world, always alert, always cautious. Every small success built confidence, and every day together strengthened their bond. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant oranges and purples, The child finally spoke its first words in a language Armand could understand, not with words as humans know them, but with thoughts and emotions projected clearly into his mind. It expressed gratitude, trust, and something else, hope. The child's heart carried the memory of Armand's sacrifice and courage, and it promised silently to honor him in every action, in every choice, and in every step it would take in the future. Armand felt a deep sense of fulfillment, realizing that the child's survival and growth were the living proof of his efforts. Time passed, and the child grew stronger, wiser, and more aware of its own place in the universe. Armand, once an ordinary human, had become its mentor, guardian, and friend. He had shown that courage and compassion were not limited by size, species, or strength. They were qualities of the heart, and they could shape destinies. The galaxy, though vast and filled with countless beings, had now witnessed a story that would endure forever, the story of a human who had stood between life and death to protect an innocent being. Eventually, the day came when the child was ready to step beyond the small town, to explore the wider universe, and to fulfill its potential. Armand watched with a mixture of pride and sadness. He knew that this parting was necessary, that the child's destiny extended far beyond his reach. Yet he also knew that their bond would remain unbroken, carried in memory, trust, and the lessons they had shared. As the child prepared to leave, it looked at Armand with eyes filled with understanding, and a silent promise passed between them. The human who had protected it would never be forgotten. The child's departure was quiet but powerful. With a small, controlled flare of energy, it lifted off the ground, moving gracefully into the night sky. Armand watched until it disappeared beyond the horizon, a sense of awe filling his heart. The town around him remained quiet, unaware of the extraordinary events that had unfolded. Yet he did not feel lonely or defeated. He had played his part in a story that transcended planets and stars. He had stood bravely when it mattered most, and in doing so, he had changed the course of a life and perhaps even the galaxy itself. Years later, the child, now grown and powerful, carried Armand's memory as a guiding light. In distant worlds and faraway civilizations, the story of the human who had risked everything to save an innocent being became legend. The child honored Armand through actions that reflected courage, compassion, and wisdom. Every life it protected, every choice it made, carried the echo of a human heart that had once stood between death and life, though Armand's name may have faded from Earth, in the wider universe it lived on. It was spoken with respect, admiration, and gratitude. The story reminded countless beings that even one ordinary life, filled with courage and compassion, could change destinies and inspire hope across the stars. And deep in the heart of the galaxy, the legacy of that human who had chosen love over fear, action over hesitation, remained eternal. As Armand looked back on his life, he realized that the journey had taught him truths far greater than he could have imagined. Courage, sacrifice, and trust were not just heroic words, they were choices, lived every day in small and extraordinary ways. By standing between the child and danger, he had shown that even the smallest being could make the biggest difference. And in that choice, he had left a mark on the universe that would never be forgotten. In the quiet moments, Armand often looked up at the stars, imagining the child traveling among them, safe and strong. He smiled softly, knowing that he had done what he could. The galaxy, vast and mysterious, had witnessed his courage, and through the child's journey, his legacy would continue. One human had stood between an innocent being and death and, in doing so, had changed the galaxy forever. The universe, vast and endless, would remember.